All right, welcome everyone. We'll just get started shortly once everyone's logged in and we're confirmed that we can begin. Welcome, Mr. Lang. Nice to see you.
Chair, nice to see you.
So just a reminder to any members who are calling into the meeting, please keep your microphone on mute. We're just waiting here for Mayor Holder to join us, and we'll come in shortly. All right. Ms. Foster, are we good to begin?
Before we do,
we're good. Thanks, Kate.
Was there someone who wanted to say something there before we started?
yeah, thank you, Chair. It's Ed here. I have come up here a 12 o'clock meeting with the big city mayors of Canada. So I'm not sure to what extent my participation will impact quorum. So I'm very respectful of that. Can you give me some advice?
So Mr. Lang has joined us. Thank you, Mayor, for your consideration. So I believe we would be at quorum if you were to depart at noon. Any other questions or concerns before we get started formally? Okay. Well, I will call the meeting to order. I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today, particularly those who will be watching us after this meeting is completed. The meeting will be recorded, and we have made the meeting link available to members of the media who are joining us today. Want to ensure that everyone stays on mute for the duration of the meeting. We are working to try to maximize the highest possible engagement despite the limitations that are on us because of the current COVID-19 pandemic. We had to continue our virtual meeting format. This is our second virtual meeting, and we hope that we may have the opportunity for future in-person meetings, but due to the current emergency and the need for physical distancing, we had to continue with the virtual setting. I wanted to thank and appreciate all the hard work that's happening right now in our community related to the pandemic in particular to our LPS administration, our sworn and civilian members, and the administration that supports the LPSB. I want to extend my deepest gratitude. We've seen different phases of this pandemic. We've seen a warped sense of time. What was March feels like it was decades ago now. But nonetheless, as we move through what's clearly a different phase, we know that there are lots of different emotions that people are feeling, but ultimately we are so proud and grateful for the flexibility that has been shown by our community and by our LPS. Today's public meeting is going to continue in this format, and we do not know yet whether our next meeting will be in person or virtual, but we will keep the public informed about this as much as we can. I'd also like to send gratitude to all those that have supported our LPS, all the donations of necessities, food, all those items are very much appreciated. So I want to thank the community that have supported that. And again, as a frontline worker, I want to thank everybody who's been supporting us in healthcare through this very challenging time, but a time that we've seen everybody rise up. One request, just a technicality, the main microphone in the LPS office, if that could just be muted unless someone's speaking to avoid background noise, that would be helpful. Thank you. All right, are there any disclosures of interest? There's no anticipated addendum items or new business. Does anyone on the board have anything to add? Okay, minutes of our April 16th public meeting. Any questions or motion to approve?
I'll move, Chair.
Moved by Mr. Lang, seconded by Deputy Mayor. All in favor? Carries. Item number 5, hate, bias, motivated crime adequacy standards report. I'll turn it over to Deputy Chief McIntyre.
Thank you, Chair, through you. This report comes to you, of course, as it relates to board policy and adequacy standards. And this is a completely revamped report that you would have seen from years previous. Our intention here was to provide additional education and overview and really explaining our occurrences, what the definitions are, and our tracking of this issue. One thing that I'd like to point out, the public report you see on the face page, it looks like it's authored from our chief. It is not. I think our people in CID do themselves a disservice. The report comes from our organized crime section. That is my error for not catching that. They report up through me. And so I present you with this report, not, of course, from the chief. The authoring is, of course, from our criminal investigation division, and specifically the tracking of all these occurrences comes from organized crime. So I just wanted to open and to point out that error. It was my fault. Moving forward, this report, I hope, helps, and we can always continue to edit this as things change, but I hope it gives you additional introduction and a background to what we're looking at. It really speaks to how we track these occurrences, the investigation that goes into them, but importantly, the link between the investigative side of the house and our frontline officers, specifically the diversity officer. So what you'll see in this report, if I were to highlight a couple things for you to share, is that we do extensive training, and you'll see that the actual numbers of reported incidences are low. That maybe is not a good thing. How is trust in the community? What are our community partnerships looking like? How are we engaging the community? What is the diversity training with our members? What is the cultural fluency of our membership? So we continue to drive home all of those instances to try to really engage, but to make the public feel as though they can trust us and have a relationship with the police so that they could report these instances. So when you look at the bar graphs, please be mindful of the number. You'll see a big swing in the bar graphs, but it's really just because the occurrences that are represented are representative there in the chart are really quite low. But But I hope that this report gives you a great overview. We've tried to drill into the groups that are targeted by either crime or behavior that's hate motivated. On page 4 of the report, if the public is watching as well, you'll see that there is a breakdown of just targeted groups, a plus or a minus there. That is often one, it could be the actual ethnic origin of the person targeted. But that can also look to the offender's perception of the diversity of their member. It could also relate to the offender's action or the comment they have made to a member. So that's how those are tracked. I just wanted to share that with you. And it looks at a 5-year trend, which is, I think, part of what the report you would have seen last year. But this just kind of represents that with some additional definitions and just graphically gives you a picture. But I just caution you, of course, on the graphs. So a hate crime is really a criminal offense. It's something that is done that makes out a criminal offense that we define in the criminal code. A hate incident speaks to the behavior of the interaction. So through you, Chair, I forward this report and I'm open. My recommendation is that you receive it. And of course, if anybody has any questions, I'd love to answer them.
Thank you so much, Deputy Chief McIntyre. We'll start off by questions from the board. Vice Chair.
Thank you so much, Deputy Chief. Really found this comprehensive, detailed report very, very helpful. Obviously, a terrible thing to have to track. I'm wondering, and I know this, so this data is 2019, so I just want to make sure that's clear. So we're looking at up to the end of 2019. So we don't have the data right now for 2020, but I'm just curious. Obviously, I've been hearing about instances relating to COVID as in terms of possible hate crimes around anybody who could be identified as Asian or somebody might view as Asian Canadian. Are we seeing any of that in London? And I know, again, we don't have the data right now, but is that something that any of you have seen?
Thank you. Yes, it is through you, Chair. It was heavily reported, especially out of Vancouver, and they were tracking a lot of that information. And a lot of it is fed through the social media really platforms. And you see the different social media giants trying to take down those posts that were, of course, just proportionally reflecting or targeting, Asian population. In London specifically, we have not seen that. We definitely monitor those trends. We are alive to those. Our analysts drill in information weekly and report to us on potentially any issues spinning from that. We know, I believe it was in Toronto, maybe did a survey looking and trying to ask that exact same question. Vice Chair, to answer your question, we have not seen any of that in London at all.
Thank you. Any further questions on the report for Deputy Chief McIntyre? If not, can I get a motion to receive? Moved by the Mayor, seconded by Deputy Mayor. All in favor? Great. Thank you. Item 6. We all need a roof over our heads. So the next item pertains to award and execution of a patio roof replacement agreement. Over to Deputy Chief.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to the board. This report's coming to you for your information to advise you of a request for proposal that we issued and have since awarded a contract to undertake some much needed roof repairs here at our headquarters. The board report as presented to you walks you through what that process looked like, the timelines associated to that, the fact that 7 suppliers attended a mandatory site visit, 5 of those 7 submitted a proposal based on the committee's review of those proposals. Only 2 proponents were deemed to have passed and had the requirements that we needed to perform the type of work that we were looking for. And in the end, we had selected the individual who had the highest technical score, or the company that had the highest technical score and the lowest cost. So is presented to you for our recommendation is that you receive this report for your purposes. Construction will get underway in accordance with any of the restrictions associated to construction and labor related to the distancing and the COVID pandemic. And we look forward to having a roof that's repaired that won't be leaking. Subject to any questions.
Questions from board members? If not, can I get a motion to receive and approve? Moved by Mr. Lang, seconded by Vice Chair. All in favor? Sorry, Deputy Mayor, I didn't catch your video there. I want to make sure I have your vote.
I saw a reference that said he could look.
Okay, so we'll just have to note that he left the meeting before I was able to capture his vote for this item. We'll move into item 7. This is a Missing Persons Act statistics report.
Thank you, Chair, through you. The Missing Persons Act in 2018, of course, came into effect July 1st of 2019. And what this is it just requires the chief to report annually on urgent demands made by the police in effort to locate a missing person. The report outlines when we make those urgent demands and the why behind making an urgent demand. And just a point of clarity, these are people that are reported missing. There is some urgency to locate them or some exigency. We are not doing any type of an urgent demand. I'll explain what those are. To further a criminal investigation or to do anything of that nature. Truly, it is about recovering the missing person as quick as we can. So an example of an urgent demand would be tracking what they're doing with their banking information. We can often do a check with exigency to see if someone's used, let's say, their ATM card. We can do checks on their cell phone. Where were they when they last activated or used their cellular device? Again, these are all done in effort to locate the missing person as fast as we can, and they're only done in exigent circumstances and completely outside of anything to do with a criminal investigation. This is the welfare of the person. So the attached report shows you when we have used those demands and the number of times. And my recommendation is that the board receive this report, and I'm open to any questions you may have.
Any questions from board members? If not, can we publicly get a motion to present it? By the mayor, seconded by vice chair. All in favor? All right, thanks. So Deputy Mayor is just trying to connect back in so that everybody's aware he has contacted me. Moving along to item 8, the London Police Service Bicycle Registry 529 Garage Update. Deputy Chief Betts.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to the board. It gives me great pleasure to be able to bring this program on behalf of the London Police Service to the City of London. You will recall that in September of 2019, Shelley Carr, who I believe is on with us, watching us live, Shelley had brought this forward through a deputation to the board, asking that the board support the creation of a bicycle registry program at 529 Garage in particular for the City of London to help the cycling community be able to feel some confidence in register tracking and assisting the police in helping to recover stolen bicycles. I had made a commitment at that time that I would make sure that we had a program here by the spring of 2020. The chief has allowed me to continue on with that and with the board's support. In February, you provided the funding to enable us to be able to bring this program to fruition. It was our hope to have this program as a very public registration launch. Sadly, the current restrictions around social distancing have required us to launch it virtually, what we would call a soft launch through the media and through our web access. But what I'm bringing is an announcement that 529 Garage and London Police are now providing a bicycle registry here in the City of London. Members of the public can find that link to register their bicycles on the London Police website under the Crime Prevention tab. We have also reached out to and made connection with our partners at the City of London Crime Prevention, also at Western University and Fanshawe College, so that we can engage them in helping to promote the bicycle registry amongst not just the city residents, but when the students return to the City of London come in the fall, that we will have an ability for them to register their bicycles as well. I have used the app. I have registered my own bicycles. It's a very user-friendly app. It's important to know that the application itself is not unique to London. We are one of several police services, and I'm going to say several progressive police services in Canada who have undertaken the use of this particular application. It was first piloted in Vancouver in 2015 and it was started in 2014. If you're wondering who are the brains behind this particular app, is this a fly-by-night company? I can tell you that the person who has designed the application is Jay Allard. Jay Allard was the technical wizard behind Xbox and Microsoft's launch of Xbox and Xbox One. So there is some significant technical resources behind the structure of this particular application. In essence, what it allows a user, a bicycle owner to do is to upload photos of their bicycle, a description of their bicycle, pictures of them with their bicycle, including their serial number, to a database. The database exists on the 529 Garage app. User's agreement is with the 529 Garage. It's not with the London Police. It's the user that has uploaded and determines what level of information they care to share with 529 Garage. The benefit that the cycling community has from this is that we all have access to that particular application. We can download it through either an Android Play Store or the iOS, the Apple Store. When I have that phone app on my device, or any user has that on their device, it will provide them with a means of receiving an alert notification if a bicycle is stolen. So as Shelley will know, as she advocated for, when a bicycle is stolen, a user is always encouraged to report the theft of their bicycle to the police. However, they can help to increase the eyes in the community by pushing an alert out through the 529 Garage app. Probably the closest correlation I can give you is like an Amber Alert. So those people who are participants on the 529 Garage app will receive a notification that a particular bicycle with all the description and as much information as the owner of that bicycle wishes to share will be pushed out to the users. Users also have the ability to go on to that app and look to see whether or not their bicycle has been recovered under the Found Bicycle tab within the program. So it's a tremendous opportunity for us to introduce this. It's a crime prevention tool, we believe. It's also it's a victim assistance tool, as we hope to be able to use this to reunite bicycle owners with their bicycles in a more timely fashion. It's crowdsourced in that the cycling community is the one that is funneling all the information into the app. And there are some additional crime prevention aspects to this. There's a shield that you will have seen me reference in our February 20th board meeting. The shields are a visual deterrent so that as the program becomes more well known and received here in the city, would-be bicycle thieves will know that that tamper-proof shield has a unique serial number that allows any user of the app, including London Police Service, to query that database and determine who and if that bicycle is stolen. So tremendous opportunities here. We will do a in-person launch and help to facilitate a very wide public registration once the restrictions that we're currently facing are complete. I could continue talking about this, and I know that some of our crime prevention folks will be available to speak with the media following the board meeting, and some things have already been arranged in that regard. But subject to any questions you have, it's my recommendation, happily made, that the board receive this report for this information.
Thank you so much, Deputy Chief Betts, and congratulations to you and to the London community for such an awesome and exciting initiative. The board is very proud to support this, and little bit sad that we can't have it celebrated and honored in the public manner that we had initially wished to do so. And also personal congratulations to you, Deputy Chief Betts, for your leadership in this initiative. Any questions from the board? If not, I'll ask for a motion that the board receives this report for informational purposes, made by Vice Chair, seconded by Deputy Mayor. Any comment, Vice Chair?
I know that Deputy Chief Betts mentioned this already, but I think it is worth highlighting that this was really initially driven by a member of the community who appeared before the board, and she is here today watching silently. That's Shelley Carr. So I think it's worth highlighting for a second that in a time where we don't have a lot of good news, this is a nice good news story in the sense that a member of the community identified a need, reached out, came, spoke to us, gave us some really good options. And then thanks to great leadership from administration, took that and made something happen with that. So I think it's worth highlighting again that this is a really nice moment to celebrate. And if other members of the public, if you're inspired, if there's things like this, projects like this, you're always welcome to come talk to the board. You never know what might happen. And thanks, Shelley, again.
Thank you, definitely. Any other comments? All right, so motion has been made. All in favor? Carried. We're going to move on to an important item referring to the COVID-19 disclosure policy. So it's important to note that under a regulation of the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act, health authorities have been directed at a provincial level to share personal health information, including names, dates of birth, addresses, and COVID-19 status information of individuals to police services. The board has been directed to establish a policy in this regard and has been engaged in robust discussion on developing and drafting an information sharing policy regarding COVID exposure. This is a policy that we have been directed to establish by the provincial government. In our discussions thus far, we have been very clear that we want to ensure the safety of our first responders, but also draft a policy that is sensitive to the needs and concerns that have arisen related to privacy and the complications that may arise related to the access and destruction of confidential health data. The board is in full agreement regarding the importance of ensuring that our first responders have adequate personal protective equipment when interacting with any members of the community, including potential or known COVID-19 positive cases. Access to personal protective equipment is an important aspect of ensuring the safety of our team and our LPS members. The board has also heard concerns regarding the potential disproportionate impact of COVID information sharing, particularly on marginalized communities. It's of particular concern of the possible inequities for these communities that could potentially be perpetuated by information sharing unless appropriate safeguards are made. For example, those with precarious living arrangements, struggling with homelessness, those who might be Black racialized, or those who may avoid seeking help for fear of persecution. We have heard from community members who have felt threatened and unsafe and want to assure them that we have listened and are aware of their concerns and are balancing them as we draft the policy that balances the need for safety as well as the concerns of the community. With that, I will turn it over to a Vice Chair who wishes to share some comments as well.
Thank you, Chair, through you. I just wanted to let the public know that this was quite a challenging policy. To start off with, there is no doubt that we have to be very cognizant about the safety and the health of our first responders. They're out there in the front lines every single day, dealing with the community, dealing with the community during a global pandemic. So I want to stress that is something that we took very seriously. But as the chair mentioned, it was that balancing act in terms of also ensuring that this intrusion into a person's privacy was appropriately balanced as well, and that we built in some protections into the policy. The aspect that I think is critical here is that this is not going to be a long-term implementation. I want to reassure everybody that although the policy is not quite ready, we're, I think, about 90% there. The administration has already been incredibly proactive in terms of ensuring that the information is limited, that there's training being received, and that there's going to be the destruction of that information on a timely manner. So at this point, we don't have the policy ready to be shared, but just please know that those are the balancing acts that we're trying to maintain. A lot of the issue here is that this was pushed down, as everybody is aware, from the provincial government that created this regulation and then requested that Police Services Board create these policies. And because everything's moving so quickly, and I have sympathy for that, I think there are some gaps in the information. So I think there's going to be, one of the things that I might suggest is as a board, we send a letter to the ministry just highlighting some of the concerns we have, again, recognizing that safety is priority. However, there are things I think about the portal that should and could be addressed, and perhaps the board could advocate for that. So the two that just spring to mind, for example, is ensuring that the auditing function is available to police services so that the board can monitor that. Right now, we have very limited access to that information. My understanding is the portal doesn't have a date for when somebody tested positive. So, theoretically, you could end up being in the database for an extensive period of time. So I think some of those issues can be addressed and still be done in a way that respects safety and tries to build in some protections in terms of privacy. Sorry, and so I just would like to move that a board send a letter to the ministry highlighting some of those concerns.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Is there a seconder from the board for motion? Councillor Cassidy? Just before I open it up to the board members, I also wanted to echo Vice Chair Toth's compliment regarding our administration. I want to make sure that the public is aware that our chief and our deputy chiefs are also quite sensitive to these concerns and have been working proactively with us around ways to ensure and mitigate against any of the issues that have been raised. So we have a motion. Any members of the board wish to speak or comment? Any questions? Chief, did you want to speak to this matter as well?
Just briefly, thank you very much, Chair. So we have our procedure in place, which echoes or is consistent with the board policy. And just a thank you to the board. I know you have your due diligence in terms of your board responsibilities to ensure these safeguards are in place to protect the privacy of the public, but you also gave the same due diligence to the protection of our officers. So we appreciate that. And I know the LPA does as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief. So as Vice Chair mentioned, the policy is almost in its final state and we will definitely be sharing it. I'm also happy to answer any questions about it that might be posed by members of the public or the media subsequent to our meeting today. I'll call to question. All in favor of the motion? Carried. Thank you. All right, we'll move right along to item 10. Item 10 refers to concerns that have been raised regarding the use of facial recognition technology. Late February of this year, which again feels like it was centuries ago, but nonetheless, not too long ago, there was growing concern regarding the use of facial recognition technology. The board had been in regular communication with Chief Williams regarding this issue and appreciate that our chief has made it clear that the use of any such technology by London Police Service members was to stop immediately. The chief had also made it clear that LPS as an organization had not formally engaged in the use of any such technology, particularly pertaining to the company known as Clearview Technologies. The board has also supported the chief's work to follow the advice of the Privacy Commission and the Ministry of the Attorney General regarding the need to ensure that the use of any such technology in the future would be considered in a manner that is consistent with both the complexity of this issue and the concerns that have been raised, widespread concerns regarding privacy from the public. It was important for us to not defer or delay this item on our agenda and I want to turn it over to the chief to speak to the matter as well.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the recap of what occurred in February. So where I last left off is I had indicated to the board and to the public that we would conduct a review into our use of this software. And that review was completed, and it did take some time, but I can share the following information. Some of our members were made aware of the Clearview AI technology at a training seminar in November 2019, and it also surfaced that other training courses and other seminars offered similar information to officers about this technology. It was percolating about the police community, and it was being marketed to officers. It was marketed to our officers as a trial, and they were provided free online access with a login code to try the software out. We determined that seven of our members accessed the software on multiple occasions and tested, or for lack of a better term, played around with the application using photos of themselves or other public figures. Only one of our members on one occasion utilized the software as a result of an investigation. And in that case, I can share that it was an investigation involving a young person who was in a change room in a department store, and a male, a male adult, a voyeur, was spying on the young person. Police were called, and we attended. Security footage from the store was obtained that contained the image of the voyeur. The investigator utilized the Clearview technology in an attempt to identify the suspect, but that attempt was not fruitful due to the quality of the security footage from the store. So the investigation has gone no further. We have double checked through our IT back channels that no members have attempted to access the technology since my order was originally issued back in February to cease technology. I do maintain that the officer was well-intentioned in that case, but however, I completely appreciate that there are privacy implications and that we needed to hit pause on the use of this software. So since then, we have developed a service procedure that guides the implementation of all new technology. And that procedure has been disseminated to our membership and embedded within the rest of our procedure manual. And that procedure is heavily reliant on resources available to us through the Information and Privacy Commission. And we're using the tools that they have recommended that we use to screen the use of new technology. So in a nutshell, all new technology will require a privacy impact assessment prior to its implementation. And I'll just add that the reality is that this technology is not coming. It's already here. Artificial intelligence permeates many aspects of our lives, and beyond policing, but definitely in policing. And we also recognize, though, that we have extraordinary powers as the police officers. And we need to keep those powers in check. So, I think it's unrealistic to think that AI will not interact with policing in the future, as it already has. But we have measures in place to do our due diligence as we bring forth new technology. So I hope that helps. Subject to any questions.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions from board members? Vice Chair?
Obviously, when the story first broke in February, it's been a few months since then, but I'm really glad that we've brought it back. So thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief, for keeping an eye on this. I wanted to thank the Chief for following the process, the way that it was done with the investigation and then implementing these new policies. I think that's critical to public trust. It shows to the public that privacy is important. I think this new procedure in terms of going through that privacy impact assessment goes a really long way. I have to say that I'm not impressed with the company and how they unrolled that out in these training seminars. I think that's quite problematic that it was rolled out without any sort of a systemic approach to actual leadership and governance boards. However, it is what it is. And I agree with you, Chief, that I don't think that there was any malice whatsoever involved. But I think we should all feel safer now that we know that there's these privacy impact assessments. And I wanted to thank you for making that happen and implementing that change. And again, it's what exactly we were talking about with the previous item. It's always that balancing act that we have to engage in.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Cassidy.
Thanks. I just want to also emphasize that there's a policy going forward, and through you, Mr. Chair, I want to thank the chief for that as well, because technology is moving at lightning speed. It's difficult to keep up. So to have a policy in place where any new technology needs to be vetted before it's implemented by anyone, I think that's really a responsible thing to do. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Any other comments? All right, can I get a motion that we receive the Chief's update regarding facial recognition technology, moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Mr. Lang? All in favor? Great. All right. So we're going to move ourselves along. We've had a pretty good pace with these items as we move through. I'm just gonna pause for a second, make sure everybody's in a good place, and we'll move right into the item 11. This item refers to the sharing of our London Police Service Board policies publicly. We've had a significant amount of discussions internally, and as a board, I've been committed in terms of our governance function to ensure that any of our policies are publicly available and that anybody can read them at any time. Democratizing access to these policies is an important priority for us as a board because it is essential to our legislative functioning and our role in terms of being accountable to the community and the public. All 105 policies are now posted to the London Police Service Board website for the interest of anybody who wishes to review them. I did want to take some time to thank our administrator, Ms. Jen Foster, for her extensive support. This was quite a task to take this number of policies and ensure that they were accessible. And also, in addition to thanking her, I'd like to thank our IT services that have helped us in this endeavor. I'd also like to thank Mr. Paul Strickland, who's been helpful in terms of navigating some of the questions that were raised from a legal perspective. Any questions or comments from board members regarding this item? If not, can I get a motion to receive my update regarding the sharing of policies? Moved by the Mayor, seconded by Deputy Mayor. All in favor? Thank you. So our next item is related to the service delivery model review. There's a study that was requested, that was completed, and has been posted for review. This towing service delivery model report was discussed by the board extensively at our April 16th meeting. We had received the report from LPS administration, and the consensus among the board at that time was that this issue was important to the public and would be shared at a future meeting where public would be able to review the report and where we would be able to maximize any engagement or questions. We thank all members of our community that have shared their correspondence with us and their thoughts and perspectives on this complex issue, which does intersect between our scope as a London Police Services Board and some of the scope related to the City of London in regards to things that are outside of what we do at LPSB. It is important to comment also that there's been significant public input regarding this contract at the city, and I know that members of our board are aware of that as well. So with that stated, we're bringing forward this report for discussion, and I'll pause and see if members of the board would like to speak to the report that was shared, ask any questions of our administration, or help us move towards a decision. Yeah.
Thanks very much. We've clearly heard some public feedback, specifically from groups, owner operators in the industry. I wonder to what extent there's been that kind of dialogue with folks who are interested in participating in this issue. Perhaps that's directed to the chief.
Yeah, go ahead, Chief Williams.
I think I didn't hear the entire question. I think it was the extent of our involvement with the other operators. Is that okay? Thanks for the question. We have received written material from a number of other of the private tow operators, and we have also met with them, and that informed part of our review, which you have before you. So that was one of our undertakings during the process.
Go ahead, Mayor.
So as a follow-up question, understanding your report, Chief, and looking to beyond what has been recommended in your report, what would you see the process look like in timing if this was to be considered opened up more broadly? What would the expectations be if we can just forecast a little into the future as to what competitors to the current operator could expect from, and for that matter, the current operator in terms of
I don't even have the report in front of me.
Yeah.
environment? Could you help me understand that a little bit better, please?
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Mayor. One thing my takeaway from the collating this report for everyone is there's a couple limiting factors. And it doesn't mean that the board policy, how it existed before, can't be changed. There's aspects, I think, that can be changed. We heard in the public board session, the independents speak and the concerns that they raised. We know through conversations with the city or Kratolik specifically, that the city administration also plans to hold public participation meeting in either the third or fourth quarter, specifically related to regulations and drafting of regulations, associated accident scenes, towing and storage rates. We know that when those fees are not consistent, when the rules and regulations governing the tow industry are not embedded or consistent or documented, we know that can increase risk not only to the service, because we of course have a fiduciary responsibility embedded, but also to the public and to the customer who's having their car towed, for example. We know right now to have those fees associated go all over the map and not be consistent is of course a disservice to the citizens of London. So I think as a move forward, my personal recommendation is that the city continues that piece, the bylaw and all of those aspects that the city's planned and the issues that were raised in public consultation. As it relates to the actual contract itself, we in the report put in a bunch of recommendations, and that was again really highlighting the need for the security features of the compound and all of the different aspects that align to maintaining evidence continuity for a criminal code investigation. So embedded in that report, you see the highlights of what the police require. But in saying that, could aspects of the board policy be changed? And so that those moves forward, we're more than welcome to look at that. We recognize and heard, of course, the independents speak. You'll see in the comparison chart, we know that anytime the police in the current contract, anytime the police need to seize the vehicle, of course, right now, by the contract, we're using Ross's. It's important to note that 49% of all of the other tows were done by independents. So it's about half. So could we somehow improve that ratio by altering wording in the contract. And I think there's room to do that, Mayor, to your point. So we are open. We're here to listen. Again, it is the board's contract. The report before you was merely to spell out the history, the why, the requirements of the police service itself, and then of course highlight, that responsibility we have to the public, and of course to maintaining evidence as it relates to criminal code investigation. So I hope that helps. I think the city's attempt to move forward in conjunction with the boards, I think are all great measures that need to occur.
So through you, Chair, just as a follow-up, and thank you, Deputy McIntyre, for that. We did have some hearings or some input from operators at the municipal level. There was some talk about standards and codes of conduct and the like, and I wonder if I'm not aware at the city level at this stage if that's been shared through to our city staff. But my question then through you to the deputy is, do you know if any of this in terms of standards, education interest or focus or codes of conduct, things that were discussed? I don't want to blend the two, but have you received anything that I've not yet received at the municipal level?
I'm through you, Chair. My only correspondence recently was with bylaw Urs Katolik, who just advised that, are these planning to have this public participation meeting in either the third or fourth quarter to help iron out some of those details. We know that the bylaws associated to towing, of course, are separate from the board contract, but and I speak to them in this report because it's interesting that they run concurrent. I think at the end of the day, the takeaways from the policing perspective is that the service we're offering and supporting and standing behind just needs to be professional. So we heard the independent delegation speak about establishing an association and doing all of those things, eager to take part in that. And I think they need the opportunity to do that. It's not our intention to eliminate or to exclude anyone from that. The recommendations we put forth in our report just outline kind of that criteria, but I think that was echoed amongst all of the independents. So I think we need to know, is that in place? What do they have? Are they going to form an association? What do the rules and regulations concerning the association look like? What is city doing from a bylaw perspective to address some of those issues that, again, were raised in the public session? And then how do we, the police agency, change our policies and procedures to adapt to all of those avenues? And then that would be reflected in the board policy. I do think that the board policy, there's aspects of it that can be changed to, again, widen that lens, widen the goalposts, if you will, of the agencies that can be used. And we're definitely open to that and listening to those decisions moving forward.
Sure, that's very helpful. Thank you, Deputy.
Thanks, Mayor. Vice Chair?
Thank you, Deputy and Chiefs. I think what initially for me was a more of a straightforward decision has become, has changed over time and evolved as we've started to hear back from businesses. And one of the things that has really been ringing true for me is this feeling that there's a lot of small businesses that are trying to earn a living, and I know what it's like to be a small business owner trying to compete with larger entities. So I think there's a little bit of just an emotional bias there for me as well. And I think that one of the things that's jumping out, and I'm glad that Deputy Chief McIntyre is highlighting that there can be change in our policy. It's one thing to have an exclusive contract, if you want to call it that, for certain situations like impounding, for example, and I think that's clear. What is less clear to me, and perhaps the chief or deputy chief can answer this, is why on earth we would have officers or build into a contract that if an individual doesn't have a preference, and the wording is something like if the customer does not elect to utilize a different company, then the member shall utilize Ross, and I'm paraphrasing. And I don't really see any value to that. It seems to me that Ross already has a specific direct line to certain areas where impounding occurs. It seems to me this is an area where we shouldn't have officers making any recommendations. It should just be on the customer. And so that is one area I would specifically like to see addressed, but perhaps there's something behind that clause that I'm not aware of. So perhaps we can start there.
If I can, Chair, through you, it's a great point, and you're right. It is right in the board policy specifically directing that if the citizen does not have a specific tow company that they would like to use, that we just default to our current contracted tow agency, which in this case is Ross's. So the why behind that, from my spot here, I actually don't know the specifics behind that. But what I can highlight or share is that when we're standing at the roadside with a member of the public and they're asking our opinion, I am good to give them a list of tow agencies as long as I know that there is some credibility, that there's safety, that there is, right, all of those things we speak about in the rules and regulations and all of those governing principles are intact, that I don't inadvertently send somebody down the garden path with potentially an agency that might not be as professional as we would all as a collective like them to be. So can that be changed? I absolutely think it can be. I think it was immediately, if I were to just to assume it's a default to security, because we obviously have all of those operating principles in place with Ross's, but can that be changed? I think it can. And I think it really speaks to the need for the tow agencies to be that professional organization and to have some of those metrics in place that we can rely on and then of course stand behind. So we're an extension of that as we give advice to the public. And so that's just my only piece of concern. I think it's absolutely a great idea to change that.
Thank you. I'm just going to turn the floor to the Vice Chair for a moment so I can speak to this matter. Part of the challenge here, I think, is people often do conflate two separate issues. There's the issue that we're discussing today, which is very specific to the police service and our role as a police service board. The other issue, which is related, has to do with the towing industry and concerns that have been raised related to activities that perhaps are less than professional. I think that this is a matter that I take very seriously as a member of the London community. And I take it seriously because I am quite concerned about the impact of those unprofessional activities, such as price gouging, such as holding vehicles hostage, on some of the most vulnerable members of our community. And I would like to say that many of those members of our community are elderly. We know right now how important it is as a community to collectively remember how vulnerable some of our elderly are and how they can be disproportionately impacted by the distress that arises from such unprofessional activities. The regulation of those activities is out of the scope of this board and falls within the city. And I know that the city is taking that issue seriously. I think it's an important issue that we'll need to continue to have public engagement on the side of the city and bylaw enforcement. As a member of the board, I do support the recommendation put forward by our administration that suggests that we extend the existing contract for 1 year before extending any further RFPs. I think that the report is comprehensive and that would afford sufficient time to do the kind of due diligence and engagement required to move forward regarding the police aspect of the issue. But at this time, in the context of the pandemic, I think it's important that we keep a steady hand, and I would support that recommendation. And with that, I'll ask the Vice Chair to pass the chair back. Any other comments or questions? Would the board like to make a motion? Councillor Cassidy, and then Mr. Lang.
Sorry, it took me a while to find my unmute. So I also will support the recommendation coming from the Deputy Chief here. And I think we can use this time with this contract extension to examine the policy and see if changes are warranted. If we do change the policy, I think it's really important that we keep in mind the aspects of this policy that we're achieving right now. And I think one really important one is the time that the contract stipulates that they have 20 minutes to respond and be at an accident scene. I think that's important. I think what we would need to do if we were to say split this up the way the deputy chair or the vice chair has hypothesized, where there would be those vehicles requiring impoundment would be covered under a contract, but perhaps something different for other vehicles. So I think we need to make sure that the officers are safe. And by that, I mean, we need to find a way to discourage the chasing that we worry about. We need to find a way to, whether it's through an association, a formal association of the industry, to make sure that qualified players are involved in this. And it could be, you know, a list of those in the industry that meet the specified criteria. But so I think that there are a number of things that we have to look at. We have to ensure that the price gouging doesn't take place. All of those things that are right now really covered well under the current policy. So if we're going to change the policy, we have to make sure that those safeties for our frontline officers, safeties for the general public, protection of the general public, all of those things are covered. And perhaps this year-long extension gives us that ability and opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Mr. Lang? Please ensure you're unmuted, Mr. Lang.
I believe it's incumbent upon us as a board to be supportive of our staff from an operational standpoint. I do agree that there's two sides to this scenario, one of which is regulation, which falls to the city, and then there's the practical operational model that the administration is recommending. And I strongly recommend the proposal being put forward as it seems to be working now and it's functional. So I would support the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Vice Chair?
Thank you, Chair. I sympathize with everything that everyone's saying. To be honest, I don't know that I'm prepared to make a decision today to recommend that we extend the towing contract. I think, and maybe the chiefs can let me know if I'm wrong, I think we have a little bit of time. The only reason I say this is I am increasingly uncomfortable with the policy as drafted in terms of that one particular section, because I think it takes away an aspect of independence where we are independent from recommendations of anybody. And, you know, we don't, I'm assuming police officers don't recommend physiotherapists and doctors and lawyers. And I'm very uncomfortable with the idea that in our policy, we are required to recommend one towing company over others if someone doesn't make initial choice. And I'm reminded that people, when they're making those decisions, you know, will probably just defer. And it looks like we are preferring one over something else. So having said that, I cannot right now in good conscience support the recommendations unless I'm told that we need to make the decision today. But as Mr. Lang pointed out, I don't want to interfere with important operational decisions, but if we can hold off and find out if that can be changed in the extension, we'd have to seek some legal advice. My preference is to do that quickly and do that now instead of for a whole other year, and actually be a year and a half, as the year wouldn't start until next year. We continue with that process. But again, if any of the chiefs tell me, nope, if we don't sign today, it could be dangerous. It's not going to be good for the organization. I will defer that decision until next year. But at this point, I can't recommend it.
Deputy Chief?
If I could just chime in.
Sorry, Chief, go ahead.
Yeah, so, I mean, anything's doable. I think, and I don't have the document in front of me, I think there's a 6-month notice period, but I'm not certain of that.
It's 30 days, sorry.
Is it 30 days? Okay, fair enough. So we know how time flies. Certainly anything's doable. One of the issues is many people, in my experience, and I think the deputy shared this with me, don't know one tow operator from the other. So unless you're in the business or you've used them before, or you have this knowledge, you just don't know. So you defer, and you're bang on, Vice Chair, when you say a lot of people just defer. So I can give you a sort of a similar situation when somebody comes into our police custody and is required to call a lawyer. Okay, most people don't have a lawyer, a criminal lawyer, so we present them with a list, right? Then they call a lawyer and they do their business. So a possible scenario that has been talked about for towing is there's a list of tow companies, and the citizen can choose from the list, which seems to be more equitable. But then you raise the question is, okay, how do you get on the list? Right? So what is the criteria to get on the list? Is the criteria to get on the list the same criteria or some of the same criteria that's in the present contract, which some operators cannot meet? So there's decision points there. And then we also have a responsibility if we are putting somebody on the list of tow operators who a citizen can choose from to ensure no price gouging. Do they have a compound that's in the city? How quickly can they be at the tow scene? Because there are parameters for that. I think it's 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes, or is it 4 hours? So we wear some of that, rightly or not, if we choose to put a tow operator on the list. So it's very complicated. I agree with all the points, and it's certainly something we could work through, but it's complex. Let's leave it at that.
Thank you, Chief. Are there any? Yep, Mayor.
Thanks. I want to come back in on this after I heard the Chief and Deputy McIntyre speak, because if the issue is criteria and standards, I get that. And I don't think anyone would disagree that there has to be a certain standard. The standards around issues of compounds, whether the issues are around timing to do deliverables, be it arriving on scene and ready to go. If companies meet the criteria and standards as set by the by our chief, whoever does, it strikes me that why would we then, if we set the criteria, you can either A, meet it, or B, if A, you meet it, then you're on the list. If B, you don't, then you don't. That to me is free enterprise. If people have made investments in ensuring that their operations qualify. And my speculation is you're probably going to have 2 or 3 that do, and then you've got others that can work to meet up to that standard. But it's the standard that we set. If people can't meet that standard, or organizations can't, then they're off the list. That's not hard to me. But if they meet the criteria, again, limited numbers based on pricing, based on whatever these things that are set, I don't see an issue with them being, you can take A or B or A, B, and C. And if others want to get on the list, well, guess what? They have to meet the criteria, just like when you do the lawyers. I don't know what criteria you use for lawyers at this point in terms of who makes the list. And I'm not sure whether you talk about price gouging, which I'm sure they don't. And I'm sure you don't talk about reputations or risks that they've had in their past, which perhaps you do. I don't know how often that is reviewed, and I'm here not to cast any aspersions. I'm here to say that, and I think the Vice Chair was very articulate about this, that if there's a criteria that's set, now I'll add my piece, that I don't know why they wouldn't make the list. I think it's as simple and clear as that. And I don't know how quickly I hear the Vice Chair talk about 30 days. I want this to be done thoughtfully, but I want it to be done promptly if in fact that's the direction that we wish to go. But it strikes me as reasonable. If it wasn't reasonable, you'll tell us, Chief, and say, you know what, this doesn't work because. But because we're giving people a choice, you do that now. You just happen to do it with people in lockup. I'm now saying that people that are in accidents, I don't see a big variety if in fact they meet the standards. And I suspect the standards that we are setting would be more stringent than the ones when people pick a lawyer when they're in lockup.
Chief Williams?
I think the difference is that lawyers are regulated, and in the City of London, tow operators aren't. So, you know, I think the deputy had mentioned that there are public hearings being held at some point this year into a licensing bylaw. And I think the licensing bylaw could sort out quite nicely what the standards are and who would be licensed and who wouldn't. But it's ultimately up to the board. I mean, if we want to get ahead of that, or if the board chooses to get ahead of that, then we can work towards a new arrangement.
So my follow-up question for you, Chair, is this. I don't know that the current operator, and I have no bias one way or another, is that organization may well have standards, they may have whatever. Not sure what their certification process is. I know that they satisfy certain criteria. Not sure if there's a certification process. So if criteria was the basis, personally, I think that feels fair to me, because whether all of these independent tow operators decide to come together as an association, fine. But I think it goes well beyond that, and to the extent that I think we need to be concerned that we protect the consumer, just as the chair mentioned earlier, that we have every obligation to protect their interests. At the same time, people that have made the investment to meet the standard as set by the police and then are excluded doesn't sit with me. And I would say to you that we're talking probably at this stage, a very modest group. Maybe it's still only the current vendor, but if I accept what I've heard and what we have seen from competitors want to be part of this, I think there's somewhat of a fairness. You can pick A, you can pick B. It may be easier for the police, but it's not what's easier, it's what's right. And so in the same way, lawyers, and I would accept your comment, because I would never disparage, that they have a legal association and they have standards, codes of conduct. But you know what? I'm not sure what the current operator's code of conduct is. Perhaps they have one. Perhaps you reviewed that when it was considered before. I suspect it was by virtue of their size, the fact they had a compound and the like. But if others meet that criteria, tell me why we in conscience can't support others who have made that same kind of investment. We heard a very impassioned plea at council for people where they talk about this being their family's circumstance. I'm less moved by that, although it's compelling, as I am by the fact that if they meet all the criteria that the current vendor does, then why not?
So I'll let the chief or deputy chief speak to that, and then Mr. Lang.
Thank you, Chair. In part, I agree, Mayor, with your comments. I do think that the current contract outlines what the existing kind of criteria was, and specifically, it speaks to indemnification, but it speaks to that the code of conduct for their employees was uniform, 0 blood alcohol level, respect towards the public and the police. There was a criteria, and just know that I think we can get to a different ground. But it really requires that those tow companies probably form an association, that there's some type of governance. They don't need to meet all of the criteria for storage compounds, like heavy overnight storage heavy tows, all of those things that we might require in a policing function. I do think there could be 2 levels that's been suggested. But when the police are at the roadside with a member of the public, they need to know that they're not sending the public off with someone that could potentially put them at risk, that there's a follow-up, that they're not going to have price gouging, that there is some security with where their property and all of those things are going. I think that's absolutely reasonable. I think there was an eagerness for those independent tow companies to form an association and to get their standards back on track to be then part of this pool of tow agencies. I think there was an eagerness when I heard them speak to do that. So the timing might be an issue. Can they form that? Can the city get all of their bylaw things? That's of course not part of the policing function. All the regulations associated to bylaw, again, not for the board or for the police. Can those things be put in place? And then let's look at it. So I do think there's some criteria that they need to establish and kind of have some governance on. And then I think we open it up to them. That's my 2 cents. You disagree, I can see.
I do. Yeah.
Mr. Lang,
So
and then
I know Mr. Lang's trying to speak. I'll speak after him.
Mr. Lang, back to the mayor, and then Councillor Cassidy.
Just to speak from a consistency standpoint, to the mayor's point, we need to be reminded that all towing operators had an opportunity to participate in the last RFP. And this recommendation, our chair so eloquently put, is to just sort of hold the course for an additional year. It's not precluding any towing operators from participating in the RFP that's coming forward, just as they were invited to participate in the last RFP.
Okay, Mayor, and then Councillor Cassidy, and then perhaps we can look to the board for some conclusion on this.
Thanks very much. Where I'm different with the deputy is on this point. I don't think this is about an association per se. I know that was much of the enthusiasm that we heard at council. I think this is more about meeting criteria that are currently in place with the London Police Service. Full stop. And if that means employees having 0 blood alcohol content, issues about criminal background checks, issues about if compounds are part of it, issues about being able to meet the time frame. We have the criteria. And it seems to me, if we've got the criteria, which I suspect very few will be able to match, I think that actually, I think it's an association, as much as you might get into education and codes of conduct, I actually think that confuses it in a way, because what happens is that some will try to come in under someone else's organization because they won't be able to meet the criteria. We have the criteria. You've articulated it extremely well. It seems to me if they meet the criteria and they satisfy us that the criteria is met, they should be included. And I wouldn't wait a year. I think if others again, I would say that if others can satisfy that same criteria as we have in place today, great. But if they don't, then I don't know why we need to wait the year, in my view. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Deputy, for that. That was helpful.
Councillor Cassidy, and then Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just going to reiterate, I really do think it's prudent to go ahead with this, and because there are so many things that we need to look at, not just with this contract, but also from the city, the parallel sort of process that's going on at the city with regard to possible regulation, possible bylaws, that sort of thing. Though that, especially that part of it, takes time. It's not a quick moving process. I also think we need to really keep in mind that there are the 2 sides of it. There's the vehicles that require impounding, and especially when there's evidence involved. And I'm not a police officer, obviously, but I do understand that evidence needs to be handled in a certain way, needs to be preserved to preserve its integrity and to make it useful in the ongoing investigation, all of those things. So there is a certain standard that the board and that the London Police Service have set with this towing contract for that side of it. Absolutely, for sure. The other side is the regular towing of an accident at an accident scene on the side of a road, and the need to get rid of that accident or that car, those vehicles, in a timely manner, in a safe manner, and in a responsible manner so that the public is protected. There was a situation there was a climate in London when this contract was put in place. There were issues in this industry that required this contract to be put in place. And in fact, when I, going through the background with the report, it started even with the Ontario government putting stuff in place. And then this contract evolved from that. So when you look at the current state of the industry, the number of operators has grown. It has not shrunk, number one. Number two, independent of this, a member of council brought this issue up at the committee level at council to look at regulating this industry, because these issues have not gone away. And I would even say in many respects, they haven't even improved. So over the course of this contract, and this contract was put in place to address these issues, the issues industry-wide have not gone away. So I don't think it's time to just, let's just throw the gates open and let the free market decide. I don't think that necessarily is the responsible way to go. I think we definitely need to look at this policy. We definitely need to look at making changes, and the industry has to be a partner in this. The industry, whether that means forming an association or something else, there has to be movement on their part to satisfy the concerns that have been raised and that were partially addressed by making this contract in the first place.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and then we'll look for some conclusion.
The question that is before us right now is, do we want to extend the current contract with Ross Towing for an additional year? And I think a relevant thing that we should ask about and understand is how much time it would take to prepare and execute a request for proposals process. Because the amount of notice that is required under the contract is one thing, but if we were to undertake an RFP, there's a considerable amount of work that needs to go into that and time required to actually do that. So I wonder if our LPS executive would maybe speak to the kind of time that is required from sort of start to finish of the RFP process.
I'll speak to that if I may, Chair, and through you to the board. As we're approaching the end of May, moving into June, we would be probably hard pressed at this point, given the nature of this particular RFP, to get it issued, to get the respondents scored, and then to put together a contract prior to the end of the year. We'd be probably hard pressed at this point. This would be something that I would want to undertake at the absolute beginning of a calendar year to allow for the input and dialogue that will no doubt come from this particular RFP process. It's not to say that it can't be done, but I think we would be challenged to do so, especially over the summer months. And the current means of how we're operating with regard to distancing is going to add an additional element to things that makes it a bit challenging as well.
Thank you. So for what it's worth, I think the current contract that we have with Ross Towing, when I'm looking at should this thing be extended, I would think, okay, what is the price like? Is the pricing good? What is the service like? Is the service good? And does it make sense for us to extend it for a year, given what would be involved with an RFP? I think with a service like this, it's a pretty large expenditure. This is a pretty significant contract, and so I like the idea of finding multi-year agreements where we can get better pricing over a longer period of time. I think going out to RFP regularly is a good practice because it's going to get us the best quality service at the lowest possible price. And so I wouldn't want a really long contract, but I do think something in the neighborhood of what we have in the current contract is wise. Given what the report in front of us says about the quality of the service and that there are very few issues in terms of people's actual interactions with the police and towing seems to be working pretty well. I'm quite comfortable extending it for a year. It seems like we basically need that time anyway if we're going to be changing the criteria for a future RFP, which is what a lot of this discussion is really focused on, is what are the criteria for what we need in terms of the service for the next time we RFP this particular service. So I think we can have more discussions about that between now and when that RFP process starts, but I don't see any reason to start it sooner than we can by extending the contract. I think extending the contract, it makes a lot of sense. I think it's delivering good value, and I think the services being provided is good for the people actually needing the towing, right? So it's good for the police who are attending the scenes. It's good for the people who are getting the towing. It gives them some kind of price certainty because the contract does a number of things, and I want to emphasize it. Like, it is in the contract that we signed with Ross that the LPS will recommend Ross if the customers don't have a preference, right? So that's why they're doing it. It's because we put it in the contract and then we signed the contract, right? So that's why we're doing it. If that's something we don't want to have in a future contract, right? That's something we could deal with when we enter into a new contract with a new provider after doing a new RFP. We could, for example, have a list of licensed and some future licensing regime licensed list and say, here's the list. You can call whoever you want. Right, so that's something different that could be done, but under the current contract, that's why we're doing it this way. And I don't see any reason to vary what we're doing now, even if we could, which I don't think we can since we're under contract with them to do exactly what we're doing now. So those are my initial comments. I think I support the extension. I think it's reasonable given the circumstances that we're in and the situation with that particular service. And I do think we need to have more discussions about what are the requirements for a future RFP. And I think the city, this is more of a commentary to city council, needs to figure out what the licensing regime is going to be very soon. Because if they're figuring it out at the same time as we're going to RFP or we're designing the RFP, that's not going to be helpful. It needs to be sorted out relatively quickly so we kind of know what the ground is before we go to RFP.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. So there is no motion currently on the floor. As we move to the last few speakers, if there is someone who wishes to make a motion to adopt the recommendation, please do so. Vice Chair and then Mr. Lang.
So I think the one thing that I would make sure is apparent is we don't actually know. We're assuming that we can't make changes to the extension contract. So the motion that I would be prepared to support or to bring would be that we delay this for a month in order to determine if, as part of the extension, because I don't disagree that I think we need some time, whether it's the association or otherwise, to develop the criteria, and going through an RFP process right now, the longer we wait, it gets trickier. But I do think that we can wait 1 month, and what I'd like is to get legal advice about whether or not we can make the extension for 1 year contingent on that small change to the contract. I think that would really be relatively small. I think we could develop criteria over the next few months if Ross was agreeable to that, and at least explore that option first. And then if we cannot do that, if legally we can't or for whatever reason, then I think we are stuck in terms of needing that time and being thoughtful about this process. But if we can change it, let's not assume right now that we can't make that change going forward, because I'm still quite uncomfortable. And I do think that in a year's time, we're going to be having a very long conversation about this whole entire system, but that would be to start. So that's my motion.
So Vice Chair has made a motion to defer decision regarding this recommendation to the June meeting. Do I have a seconder? Is that the Mayor seconding? Thank you. Mr. Lang?
I was just, I was going to move the recommendation, but I'll wait my turn.
So We have a motion to defer this decision regarding the recommendation for 1 month, moved by Vice Chair, seconded by the Mayor. Any discussion on the motion, Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. Through the chair, I wonder if the vice chair could just clarify for me so I make sure I really understand precisely what the changes that you'd like to see made to the existing contract.
I'd like to find out if we can remove or amend the clause that requires LPS right now to recommend Ross when I can't remember the wording, but when the person who has the car being towed doesn't have a preference.
So if that wasn't there, what would be the alternative?
I think as a starting point, I would like to know if we can even do it. And if the answer is yes, we can amend, then I would either consider no recommendations or developing a criteria where we would have a list. And if people meet the criteria, they're on that list. If they don't, they're not on that list.
Any other comments or questions regarding the motion? All right, we'll go to a vote. All in favor? Got 3. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, so consider the motion
Sorry.
carried.
Can you, I couldn't see who was opposed to such. Can you give that to me? It's Jen.
Sure, so we'll just review. It was in favor were Vice Chair, Deputy Mayor, and Mayor. Opposed were Mr. Lang and Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you.
So we'll consider the motion carried. Any other discussion on this agenda item regarding the towing service delivery model?
I just want to be clear that I support the delay because I think we have time to look into what Vice Chair has suggested. I actually don't think it's a good idea. So, I mean, I'm open to be persuaded, but I don't think that's really the direction we should be going in. But I think taking more time to look into it is reasonable.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, well, thank you everyone for the discussion. I know these matters are taken quite seriously, and this discussion reflects the thoughtfulness with which every board member participates in that discussion. Thanks to everyone for their engagement. We do have a new business item related to an SIU matter. Can I get a motion to add that item to the public agenda? Moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by the Mayor. All in favor? Okay, so I'll just turn it over to Deputy Chief McIntyre regarding the agenda item.
Thank you, Chair, through you. Just to update on an SIU investigation, obviously we produce a report to the board every time the SIU is engaged in a matter. The report before you outlines an incident that occurred in August. And the summary of the incident is troubling, but I can share that there was a male who was attempting to kill himself, and the police responded to that in an emergency priority. He had doused himself with gasoline and had a lighter in his hand, threatening to light himself on fire. Our officers attended. Part of the team that attended was our emergency response unit. They are equipped with numerous tools, if you will, to assist in these types of occurrences. What ended up happening in this regard was that they fired what's called a blunt impact projectile at the male. It's essentially a rubber projectile to strike the male in effort to, one, either drop the lighter, or two, to distract him enough so that we could engage with the male to drop the lighter. That was not successful. The male was able to light himself on fire. Of course, we always have fire and EMS standing by on these occurrences. The male was quickly extinguished and transported to hospital. Because his injury met the definition of a serious injury, we are bound to notify the SIU. The SIU attended and, of course, cleared our officers of any wrongdoing in relation to this incident. The report before you is a parallel investigation that we at the service conduct. And basically, it reviews what our actions of the officers were and did any misconduct follow from their actions or inactions. And in this case, it did not. They followed all procedure to the letter. They were cleared by, of course, the SIU, and you see the comments from the SIU director embedded in the report. So my recommendation for you is just that you receive the report, and I'm open to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Any questions from LPSB members regarding this report? Vice Chair?
Thank you, Chair, through you. I just want to give Deputy Chief McIntyre, just an opportunity to explain to the public that these reports, now I'm going to explain it, but how the process, it goes to us first, and then under the Police Services Act, what decisions can be made. So maybe you can just give a little primer on that.
Sure, thank you. So you're right. Basically, the board has the option when these occurrences happen. We are mandated, of course, under Section 11(4) of the OREGs under the Police Services Act to do a parallel investigation to the SIU and report that investigation to the Police Services Board. The board has the option to make this report available to the public. And that's, of course, again, under the PSA, under the Police Services Act 11, subsection 4, gives the board an opportunity to do that. All SIU matters for the public's awareness are published on their website as well. And you'll see that the report that's submitted today is very similar to that which is on the website for the SIU. So it's all about transparency. It's never, really to alert the public and to close the loop. Whenever there's an SIU investigation, we know that the media releases on those are very brief. And that's because, of course, the SIU is called in to conduct a criminal investigation. And then, of course, the police agency and the board are not able to respond. So this kind of closes the loop. It brings it back into the public realm. It allows the public to be educated to the process, the reporting that's all going on behind the scenes, the police follow up to the criminal investigation as it relates to misconduct. And then just to educate the public and finalize the investigation. So I hope that helps clarify the process piece for you, Chair.
Thank you so much. We appreciate the clarification. It's important that the public be aware that we as a board are really working towards as much transparency as possible as defined by existing legislation and policy. Any other questions on this matter? If not, can I get a motion? Moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Vice Chair. All in favor? Carried. All right. Well, our next meeting is scheduled for June 18th, 2020. Who's to say what the future holds, but we are hopeful that we may have a socially distanced face-to-face meeting. We will keep the public and the community apprised of any developments and continue to work in between meetings. I would ask members of the Police Services Board to keep an eye on their email in the next few minutes, just in terms of us reconvening and continuing some of the business that was unfinished from our meetings earlier in the day. But that stated, I'd like to wish the public well, remind the media that I would be available for comments and questions, and give the floor to the Chief for a moment.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. You made a comment at the beginning of the public meeting about just thanking the public for the donations and the kindness and support that's shown by the public towards our members. So I just want to echo that on behalf of all of our members. Supporting all first responders, clearly. I mean, the frontline health responders have done the bulk of the work, but to recognize the police at a time when so many others in our community have greater needs. So I just want to thank private citizens and businesses for hand sanitizers, various pieces of PPE, snacks, meals, all types of goods have been dropped off around the station. I've literally received dozens of emails and phone calls from the public. And I just want to pass along our thanks to all members of the public. And I know the LPA supports or is thankful for that support too. So we're very grateful and thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Before we move to a motion to adjourn, any other comments or anything else that any members of the board would like to share? If If not, can I get a motion to adjourn? Moved by Mr. Lang, seconded by Vice Chair. All in favor? Thank you. All right, thank you to everybody who's joining us today. We hope you continue to stay engaged, and if there's any questions or would like to speak to us further, please don't hesitate to reach out.